Hello, I'm Dr. Ryan Anderson. I'm one of the co-founders of Telos U. This webinar is the second in a series of 3 webinars designed to help you learn about the concept of getting out of the box and how that applies to the work that you and your child are doing during their time here at Telos U. As a little bit of a review, in our first webinar, we covered the idea of way of being, the idea of light and choice points, and how we get into the resistant way of being with other people. And we covered the concept of self-betrayal. In this webinar, we're going to go in much greater depth into the idea of self-deception, justification, and rationalization, the box, and box styles. And then in the third webinar, we'll be talking about how to get out of the box, which of course is the most important part that we want to get to. Let's do a quick review. We talked about the idea that essentially, while there's a wide variety of behaviors that we can engage in, there's essentially 2 ways of being underneath. A way where we are responsive to the humanity of other people and make it as real as our own. We see them as people. We call this being out of the box, being responsive, having an outward mindset. Or we can be in a position where we are resistant to the humanity of other people. We make them less human. We objectify them. And this is called being in the box. This is called being resistant, having an inward mindset. And so, on the one hand, we have a heart at peace with others and able to open up room for the reality of their humanity in full. And on the other, we have a heart at war with others, where we resist parts or even all of their humanity and distort both our view of ourselves and them in the process. One of the reasons this concept is so important is that way of being determines, to a great degree, our influence with other people. Having a heart at peace with other people, we're much more likely to have them be willing to respond to us in a positive way, even if we're imperfect in our techniques and our strategies. Whereas if we have a heart at war with other people, even if we are absolutely precise in techniques, we are likely to get resistance from other people. We talked about the idea that this shared humanity is constantly inviting us in a variety of ways for ways to think, feel, and respond to other people. And we are capable of obeying that particular sense, of living in conformity with it, but we are completely capable of resisting it. And so, on the one hand, we're responsive to it, on the other hand, we're resistant. And when we are resistant to it, it creates a tremendous amount of dissonance within us. Because if we're aware of the fact that we're objectifying another person, if we're aware of the fact that we are exaggerating our rightness and exaggerating their wrongness and using it to profit and justify our own imperfections, that's a lot to live with. And that's not something we just walk around with. But our forever creative minds are more than capable of resolving that dissonance in a variety of ways. And this is where the concept of self-betrayal comes in. So the act of self-betrayal, and what that means is I had a sense of the humanity of the other person. With that, it invited me to do certain things in the way that I treat them, the way I think about them, the way I feel about them. When I resist that, no one is telling me that but myself. That's my moral compass. That's my humanity resonating with the other person. So, in that act of self betrayal, deciding not to honor that sense within myself, that causes that cognitive distortion and that moral distortion that we talked about earlier, right? The dissonance that's there. And this dissonance is powerful and it's uncomfortable. So, in that resistant way of being, human beings have a form of trying to resolve that dissonance, which is swift, it's instinctual. We don't even have to think about it and do it strategically. And when we do it, it is very convincing to us to the point where we don't even realize that we're doing it. It just feels like objective reality. And this is where the concept of the box comes in. The box is the psychological process we go through in the resistant way of being to resolve that sense of dissonance. And in a lot of ways, the reason they call it a box is when it was first conceptualized, it was like living inside of a box rather than seeing the world around us and projecting onto all the sides of the box our story, our narrative, a self justifying, self excusing narrative that makes our resistance to the humanity of the other person okay. When I think about more modern analogies for that, I think about augmented reality, where we can be in a room, but I can take a tablet or a phone and project onto the walls, look at it as if it had been remodeled or reconstructed, or if there was a zombie apocalypse. I can create whatever reality I want and project it onto the world around me, and create a sense of sort of psychological virtual reality that is entirely convincing to myself. And part of that virtual reality is to hide from me that it's virtual reality, that it's not the real world. And in this new projection that we're putting around ourselves about the world, about ourselves, about the other people we're interacting with, about the nature of their thoughts, their feelings, their humanity, about our actual motives, it is completely convincing to the point that it resolves that sense of dissonance so long as we hold to it. And we are very motivated to keep that sense of dissonance away. So, with that, everything that we see around us, including ourselves while we're in the box, is distorted. And it leaves us convinced that we are seeing the truth. And this has a huge impact on us. It impacts our perceptions, our emotions, our actions, what we see as reasonable options that we have available to us, our relationships. We are responding to our box, our projected reality, as if it is real, and its impact on us is real. One of the sort of fundamental tenets of psychology is what we perceive as real has real consequences, whether it is real or not. So when I'm in the box, I can project onto someone I'm having a relationship with all kinds of very dark and disturbing motives. And the way I'm affected is as if that was true, whether or not that's what the other person actually thinks, feels, does, or intends. So, this is a very powerful psychological construction that we do. But the funny thing is, we create it pretty much effortlessly. And it is a great source of suffering and dysfunction, both for ourselves. It creates suffering that we don't have to experience because it's only the result of our dysfunction. And it is above and beyond any real mistreatment we might be receiving from that other person. But it also becomes the motive for us to create suffering for them as well. There are a lot of symptoms that we can look at to begin to recognize that we might actually be inside this kind of a box. So, at the core, the box needs blame. The foundation of this world in the psychological projection of the box is blame for the other person, making our resistance to them their fault. So we accuse other people in our minds with these, what we call horribilizing. And one of the ways that we do this to convince ourselves is we do tend to pick upon things that have some basis in reality. Everyone has quirks, everyone has flaws. When we're in the box, we find those particularly useful, and we seize upon them, and then we put some makeup on them, and then we kind of do some other things to make them larger, and we begin to exaggerate and build upon. And we can invent other flaws as well, because once you've built up their flaws enough, other things are much more believable. And these accusations occur both in thoughts and in feelings and in perceptions. We'll talk about that a little bit more later on. But another major function, so accusation is the primary dynamic of the box, but there also is a dynamic of excusing ourselves. Just as much as we have to amplify their faults, their flaws, and invent new ones, we have to exaggerate our own personal virtues, our rightness, and we have to minimize or erase the imperfections of our own humanity and our potential for making mistakes and for inadvertently contributing to problems for ourselves and for other people. So, where we are experiencing difficult emotions or are in a bad situation, we are invested in the idea of seeing ourselves as the victim of the other person, of the circumstances. We are powerless. The bad thing happening, the unpleasant thing happening, is not our fault, and there is nothing we can do to fix it. It's 100% someone else's responsibility. That's one of the symptoms of being inside the box. And we also have a tendency to distort our values to justify attitudes and actions. We'll go into that a lot more detail later on. But it's very easy for us to say the things I feel I'm doing well, suddenly all those values become much more important. Any values or virtues the other person may have get downplayed, or anything that I do, I can focus on one piece while ignoring the fact that values and virtues exist in an ecosystem of other values and virtues. So I overemphasize one, underemphasize the others to the point where a value in isolation can easily be used to harm other people. And at the end of all of this is this idea that we are correct, that our thoughts, our feelings, our conclusions, our actions are the only reasonable and rational thing anyone could possibly expect from us in that situation. And there's no room for our improvement. These are all symptoms of the box. So, to pull a little bit from the book The Choice again, a quote that describes this process of self justification is as follows: Betray myself, and I do wrong. Do wrong, and I seek to be justified. I begin seeing a world that makes the wrong seem right. Betray myself, and I seek to be justified by blaming others. I become resistant to them. Reducing people to mere objects is the way I resist them. So, when we get in that resistant mode, we do not see the person we are resistant towards accurately. We can take aspects of reality and twist them. For example, a child who is struggling emotionally with anxiety, depression, learning disabilities becomes instead, in our eyes, a rebellious child. Or an overwhelmed spouse, instead of being someone that we love and who needs our help and our attention, becomes an ungrateful spouse who doesn't see what we're contributing enough, doesn't give us enough credit, and therefore they are a nag. Or opportunities to help lift other people, that when you love someone, you want to help make their lives better. Those opportunities, which are the golden currency of love, become a burden, a tax to be paid. Or family relationships, which for most people are the primary source of happiness in their lives, become a chore, something they don't want to do if they can get out of it, or do as minimally as possible so they can focus on other things that feel more important or more interesting. And in this process, we are constantly distorting people, both ourselves and the other person. As we mentioned before, we focus on their flaws and we amplify them. We attribute dark motives to them. We vilify them. We label them in all kinds of ways. And the smarter we are, the more sophisticated we are, the more sophisticated and intelligent sounding the labels we apply. And therefore, we can't see that this label I'm applying is my way of objectifying the other person, not diagnosing, not understanding, but I'm giving them a label so I can say, this is why it's okay for me to dismiss that other person. And we create a lot of straw man arguments and narratives. So rather than representing what they actually think, what they actually feel, we create a caricature, a two-dimensional version of their point of view that is easy to shoot down because it's ridiculous. And we attribute this as their real thoughts, their real feelings, their real position. And we shoot down their straw man arguments. I feel very victorious and very superior while we're doing so. And because their thoughts, their feelings, their positions are so ridiculous, we feel justified in dismissing the way they think and the way they feel. And we have created for ourselves a need for the other person's faults. In fact, a need that can't be satisfied by the faults they actually have. It must be fed by amplifying and building upon their faults. So, like it says in the book The Choice, betray myself and I horribilize others. I focus on their faults and even exaggerate them. But you say others can be horrible, they can do wrong to you. Yes, but when do others appear most wrong to me? In self betrayal, I seize upon their imperfections, I magnify them. How profitable I find others' faults when I need to justify my own. So, beyond blaming cognitively with thoughts, it is a little surprising to realize that we also blame with our emotions, with our feelings. Now, again, one of the things we've discovered in the study of psychology is that thoughts are real, but that doesn't mean they always tell us the truth. Thoughts aren't always an objective reality representation. In fact, they never are. They always keep part of us, our world. There's always some degree of us projecting into our thoughts and our perception of the world. So while our thoughts are important, we need to recognize that they are subjective. They're data, but they're not perfect. Emotions are the same. Emotions are real, but they don't always tell us the truth. Emotions are oftentimes a response to the narrative that we're spinning to make sense of our perception of the world around us, and therefore are subject to the same kinds of personal distortions that thoughts are. But they still have the same impact on us, whether they are a real representation of the world around us or not. And both thoughts and feelings can and frequently are distorted to protect us from the cognitive and moral dissonance that we experience when we are in that resistant way of being towards someone else. And so, in this process, while there may be things that the other person is doing that are genuinely hurtful or disrespectful, many of the negative emotions that we feel towards that other person when we have a heart at war at them are due not to what the other person is doing, but in fact are created by the box, by the way the box is amplifying and justifying our lack of responsiveness to them, and it's having to take whatever harm they're doing to us and increase the decibels exponentially to help us feel continually justified. And so that's kind of the trick, is when we're in the box, while externally we might say, I really wish this person would stop doing X, Y, and Z, we've actually created a new need for ourselves. We've created a need for them to not only continue those things, but to amplify those things, because what that gives us is justification and comfort in the idea that our thoughts and feelings towards them are justified. And we don't need to make any effort to change how we think, how we feel, or what we do towards them. And this new motive becomes extremely powerful and competes with every other motive that we have. Now, again, this does not mean that other people cannot genuinely hurt us with their attitudes or actions. This does not mean that people are not capable of abusing us. Those are real things. But it does mean that when we're in that heart at war zone, we amplify whatever degree of real wounds there are. And we create others entirely of our own fabrication. So while we may in fact be being hurt, disrespected, and victimized by the other person, we also begin a process of self-victimization. We refuse to let wounds heal, to continue crippled, to be able to demonstrate how much the other person has hurt us as a way of feeling justified in how we are resisting that other person. These justify our emotional response to the other, and therefore are more important and can become more important in the resistant mode than actually healing. The goal of justification is to make these things that are wrong inside of us, our thoughts, our feelings, our behaviors, our self sabotage, our self-inflicted wounds, to make them seem right because it's the other person's fault, or at least justified. But one thing that someone pointed out to me once I thought was really interesting is when we're right, how much effort do we have to put into making ourselves feel like what we just did was right? When I say something kind to someone, I don't have to say, that person really puts in a lot of work. They have all these wonderful virtues. Boy, they had my kindness coming. And I'll take offense at anyone who says that that person didn't deserve my kindness. We never have to do that. But how often do we have to do that to justify our judgment, our contempt, our unkindness, our dismissiveness to other people? When you are right, when you are attuned with that sense of light inside of you, when you are responsive to the humanity of other people, you have no need to justify it. You don't need to expend that kind of energy. You don't even feel the impulse. But when we are at odds with those things, we do feel that impulse. And we invest a lot of time and energy into making sure that we have convinced ourselves that we are right or at least justified. And part of how we do that is we can take a system of values and morals and ethics, and we can distort those values to justify ourselves. So, for example, if someone is being harsh in their language to another person or about another person, they might call upon the virtue of honesty and saying, look, I'm just being honest. I'm guileless. I am just telling things the way they are. And in that moment, this idea of honesty, especially completely unfettered, unfiltered, and I would say impulsive, saying whatever you're thinking, that idea of honesty has suddenly become very, very important to us in that moment. But other virtues and thoughts such as compassion, kindness, self restraint, tact, suddenly those things are not at all important. We've completely devalued other values rather than seeing that they exist in a constellation with each other. But as long as we can find a pet value to pin it onto, we can feel justified. Or we may find ourselves internally and possibly even externally exhorting the importance of a work ethic when the accusation that we have towards someone else is that they're lazy. So the thing that we can accuse them of being weak in suddenly becomes so much more important to us because we can use it as a weapon against them. And we're completely blind to whatever other strengths or virtues they may be demonstrating. Those don't matter. But the ones we can accuse them on because they're less than perfect or less than even good with, suddenly those become very, very useful to us. And so, as it says in the book, The Choice, in self-betrayal, values and principles are distorted. I exploit them, even deform and exaggerate them so they can protect me from the truth. I use the right to justify the wrong. And this is also one of the hallmarks of that resistant way of being is it requires us to have an inward focus because we have to spend a lot of time focusing on ourselves to justify ourselves. And what comes from it is almost an OCD-like obsession with confirming our rightness, finding every little piece of evidence throughout the day that reassures us that we are right in our resistance to the other person. And again, this creates a huge need to freshly remember the wrongness of the other. And in fact, anything we can do to invite, provoke, or put ourselves in front of that bus of their imperfections so we can get hit by it is actually useful for us. And over time, this becomes something that becomes characteristic of us and tries to work its way into our very personality, our very paradigm, our very way of seeing the world. As it says in the book, The Choice, betray myself, and I present an image of myself. The image is that I am the undeserving victim of those I am blaming. To betray myself is to portray myself. It is to portray myself in ways that justify me. And so we begin to have this preferred way of being seen because that protects us. And this often starts with the idea of, well, I am the sort of person who is what? Responsible, strong, tenacious, a hard worker, honest, reliable. Whatever it is, we've become to say, okay, I'm going to give myself full credit for having completely embodied this idea, this virtue. So that anytime we encounter something that would challenge that, you say, well, that's impossible. If the idea is that I'm a responsible person and something I'm doing is actually kind of reckless, we just can reject it because we're saying, well, I know I'm a responsible person. So the suggestion of the person or the circumstances that I'm being irresponsible is completely unbelievable because I'm a responsible person, period. End of subject. I have completed that, and there's no way it's possible that I could be anything like that. So if I see myself as the sort of person who's smart, I'll have a hard time seeing when I'm being foolish. Like I said, if I think I'm responsible, I'm the sort of person who's responsible, then I will be blind to when I'm being reckless or self destructive. When I see myself as the sort of person who's good at solving problems, after all, I solve them at work all the time, then you'll have a hard time seeing when you're actually contributing to problems. And of course, there's the other side, kind of talking about a more better than, almost sort of narcissistic flair, but the other side is a worse than, where I'm the sort of person who is worthless. I'm broken, and therefore no one can expect anything from me or ask me to be able to contribute in a positive way. I am doing by being broken, by shutting down, by avoiding, by using drugs, by getting lost online. I'm doing the only thing that is reasonable for someone, and no one can ask more of me without mistreating me. So you'll notice there's a lot of non sequitur logic that can go on with this. Well, because I am this, it's impossible that that can happen. So, this example of non sequitur, this does not follow that. Your dog is cute. I have three little brothers. There's absolutely no connection. It's that same sort of idea. Well, at work or in this other realm of my life, I am seen this way, or I have these kinds of accomplishments. And therefore, it's impossible because I'm having those accomplishments in this other realm in my life that these weaknesses that people are trying to point out to me about my closer relationships, they can't exist. Because if I'm this way at work, then of course I'm that way at home. But that completely misses the complexity of humanity. We are capable of strengths and weaknesses in the same area, even in the same context, but absolutely between contexts. And the more we repeat this idea that I am the sort of person who, and I am justified for, and I will exaggerate my values in this way, repeatedly justify myself, the choice says, in self betrayal, and such self justifying images become characteristic of me. So, whereas we've talked before saying, look, part of how we get in the box with people is we have a sense of their humanity and we choose to resist it. But when you kind of get into this, people are saying, I don't remember having that sense, that part that you described in my relationship with this person or that person. I don't experience that. Well, part of the reason that is if we have become in a position where this is something we do frequently, we are building a box that we carry with us into new situations where we're already pre-resisting the humanity of other people before we even let the light of those human invitations connect with us. As it says in the book, The Choice, whether they claim my virtue or justify my vice, once characteristic of me, the self justifying images I create of myself in self betrayal keep me focused on myself. And I come to see others in terms of the self justifying images I've created. If their actions challenge the claim made by my self justifying image, I see them as a threat. If they reinforce the claim made by my self justifying image, I see them as an ally. If they fail to matter to the self justifying image, I see them as unimportant. And so, seeing others in terms of my self justifying image, I now enter situations already seeing others as objects. I see them to begin with in terms of their meaning for my view of myself. My self betrayal is now ongoing. And towards people or groups of people in general, I resent anyone who suggests in word or deed that I am not the kind of person I am portraying myself to be. Now, with this, there's a couple of different box styles that we can develop. In the top left, we have the better than box. And our view of ourself is superior, important, virtuous, right. And other people, of course, are inferior, incapable, irrelevant, false, or wrong. And this creates certain feelings, right? Remember how we talked about how feelings can be a part of this or distorted? We're impatient, we're disdainful, we're indifferent with other people. We think that all of their lives would be better if they just lived them the way we think they should. And our view of the world is a place of competition. It's troubled and it needs me. The world would be so much better if I was in control. Now, in the top right, we have the I deserve box, where we see ourselves as meritorious. We have done things which deserve honor and recognition. And when other people don't give us the honor and recognition we deserve, they are mistreating us. We're the victims. We're underappreciated by other people. And other people just, they're mistaken, they're mistreating us, they're ungrateful, they don't recognize how much their lives would be better if they just conformed with our prescriptions for them. So we feel entitled and we're constantly feeling wronged and deprived by the world because they're not giving us what we think we deserve. We become resentful. And the world is unfair, unjust. It owes me. It's ignorant of how much the world would be better if it just followed my lead. In the bottom left, we have the must be seen as box, which certainly relates to that self justifying image we talked about. We want other people to think well of us. And therefore, we're focused more on image than on substance. And there's a piece of us that is always going to be a little fake. We're worried. We see other people as an audience that can either give us what we want or deprive us of what we want. In other words, seeing us the way we want to be seen. We see other people then, we judge them as being judgmental. We're anxious and afraid because we constantly have to stoke that self image. And we become very needy, stressed, and overwhelmed. And the world is this dangerous sort of giant TikTok where everyone's watching me and evaluating me and giving me upvotes and downvotes. But also in the bottom right, we have the worse than box, where our view of ourselves is just not as good as other people. I'm broken, I'm deficient, especially because of what has happened to me, what other people have done to me. And therefore, I'm fated, I'm doomed. My efforts to make things better will fail because it's not my fault. I'm not the one with power here. My view of others is that they're advantaged, they're privileged, they're blessed, they're given things that I'm never going to be given. So I am powerless. That's how I feel. I feel depressed. I'm jealous of other people and bitter about having been put in this situation. And the world feels like it's conspiring against me. The things going on, none of them can be of my own creation. It must be that someone else has gone out of their way to do something to sabotage me. And I can't be responsible for any of it. Now, we're capable of having multiple box styles or all of them. They're not incompatible with each other. And in this, there's different ways we can act. We can have an explosive temper, or we can be self righteously in control of our temper, or we can use sugar coated manipulation, disdainful inattention. We can be hateful towards other people. These are all different branches of the same stream, carrying the same water, and having the same self justification and the same destructive results. One of the things that's very challenging is in this resistant way of being, we cannot see the way to change and to make things get better. Because in our way of seeing things, we're still protecting our rightness. So the solutions we come up with are also blaming solutions. If only the other person would do X, if only the world was different in Y way, if only the person would stop doing Z. And this way of thinking that the solution lies with other people changing, with the world changing, it can never be us changing. primes us for what we call collusions, which we have another webinar on because it's that important. So we'll encourage you to watch that one after you are done with this introduction to the idea of getting out of the box. But in a collusion, we are mutually engaged and hard at war with one another. And as we do that, we provide each other with what we both actually secretly want the most, but would never admit to ourselves. It's justification. If my resistance towards the other person invites their resistance of me and back and forth, then we both get the pleasure of knowing that the other person's in the wrong and that we are justified and that we don't need to change. And this becomes our new, powerful, self-defeating motivator. As it says in the book, The Choice, within my resistant way of being, I cannot conceive of genuine change. I may shift from displaying my temper to controlling it, or vice versa. I may shift from hating people to ignoring them, or vice versa. I may shift from exalting myself to hating myself, or vice versa. In each case, I change, but only outwardly. Inwardly, there has been no change at all. Every resistant change is a change merely in my style of resistance. Now, as we wrap up this leg of the webinar, there's a couple things that I would encourage you to think about, ponder, and write down, and be prepared to discuss in therapy. First, what are your preferred ways of seeing yourself and being seen? If I were to give you the prompt, I am the sort of person who, fill in the blank, what goes there for you? Can you see examples of how this plays into the tension in any of your relationships? If so, how? Can you identify anyone you are in the box with that you're resistant to, that you may be distorting, exaggerating their faults and flaws, excusing your own? What are the signs and symptoms within you of being in the box towards that person? Can you see elements of one or more of the 4 box styles? The better than, the worse than, the must be seen as, and the I deserve, in yourself, in any area of your life? And can you identify any areas of your life in which you are engaged in rationalization and justification? Take some time, ponder, write down your thoughts, and be prepared to discuss this with your therapist. And also, keep in mind that as you begin to discover these things, talking to your child about them, being open about the struggles that you have in this area and working through them is actually an important part of moving forward and building your relationship with them and healing any tensions that may exist between you.